Jessica Tarlov again had to sound off on her MAGA co-hosts and shred their misinformation and lies, this time on the topic of far right-wing violence in this country and its prevalence versus other types of violence, as MAGA will pretend that it's more likely that acts of violence are carried out about Democrats. If we're talking about the New Orleans attack, it's more likely it's carried about jihadist motivation. It often, however, comes back that right-wing values influence these attackers or the attacks, or that they themselves they just identified with more right-wing ideals, even if that wasn't the direct motivation. So I wanted to jump into what Fox News is saying is the truth about this and provide the fact checks that are needed.
The New America Foundation has done a breakdown in terrorist attacks since 9/11. It goes through 2023. We have to add the 2024 numbers once they're available, but you have 134 killed by far right-wingers, 107 killed by jihadists, 17 killed by misogynists or incels, 13 killed by black separatists or nationalists, and 1 killed by
killed by gang members.
Yeah.
I mean, that's got to be on the list.
Okay,
That's
Let's
a
how many
phenomenal
by
number.
illegals.
Yeah.
You know, let's add to the list.
Those are
I wonder how
And
many of
listen,
those killed by white supremacists were killed in prison.
Yeah.
I love
that's
this
by
game.
suicide. I mean, because oftentimes they.
How many people fell off an ice cream truck?
Now, the best part about this clip is all the MAGA people in this felt the need to defend white supremacy rather than just disavowing it outright. Like, yeah, you know, extremism exists on all sides. I don't defend that. No, they just wanted to defend the white supremacy. But yeah, I mean, this report, as we'll look at, defines far-right violence, anti-government, militia groups, white supremacist ideologies, anti-abortion perspectives. And it's these kinds of things that motivated violence that then has them fall into the category of far-right-wing violence. And you can even go through the detail of each of the ones they list. Like, they really in depth with this. You can look at the motivations for the people, the things they said, like the evidence for this, all of it, the charges. And what we find is 134 far right-wing attacks has happened since 9/11, which is almost 30 more than violent attacks carried out about jihadists. But apparently, you know, Muslims are terrorists and we have to really care about Arabs and jihadist motivations, and sympathy is a huge problem in America, but call a conservative a terrorist and all of a sudden you're like, now I'm the problem, right? But over 100 more than attacks carried out by incels and misogynists, which are essentially just conservatives anyway. 100 more than carried out by black nationalists also, which anytime you point to like January 6th, anytime you point out far right-wing violence, what about Black Lives Matter? What about BLM and those riots? Well, what about the fact that you've done over 100 more instances of violence, like murders, killings, than anyone who identifies with Black Lives Matter? And more importantly, the most important of all of this, not more here, notice the change, 135 times multiplication, 135 times greater than left-wing violence, 134 right-wing attacks since 9/11, 1 far left-wing attack since 9/11, which is why I say every time MAGA comes rushing trying to connect an attack to the left, in part, it's to distract from the fact that it's almost always their side, and every accusation is a confession, but it's so the one time that they're right, they can just hyper-fixate on that one instance to pretend like both sides are equal, or the left doesn't have the moral high ground in this regard, when we so clearly do. I mean, it's over. It's Jover, right? We clearly have the high ground. We're on the overpass, and y'all are down there.
You're saying that the white supremacists have killed more people than ISIS.
In
Where?
America, we're talking about protecting
What
the
is a
homeland.
white supremacist?
It's
Is it a
person,
white
it's
guy who
Dylan
kills
Roof.
his wife?
No, it is Dylan Roof walking into the
That's a
Miami
white
church.
supremacist.
It's someone walking into the Tree of
Absolutely.
Life synagogue. It is someone walking into a Walmart looking for Latinos to shoot up. That's what I'm talking about when we're talking about white supremacists.
Okay, so if you're
And
looking...
jihadists are like the guy who just drove through New Orleans.
Okay, but I will grant you, it is terrifying that a U.S. service member who was discharged honorably is capable of this level of radicalization. We know he went to Egypt for 3 weeks to a month, and that's terrifying. We want to know what happened there. I'm more scared of the people who are pre-radicalized, the people who come into this country easily with an agenda, who want to kill us all. Those are the people who really leave me up.
I'm not trying to minimize anyone who wants to do harm. I'm just saying to stand here and say that President Biden is out of his mind for talking about this.
This part is really infuriating. And I think it's the fake American exceptionalism that is just disguised racism, because it's really, really dumb, right? The man was a longtime veteran. 1 in 3 veterans suffer from major depressive symptoms, right? 7% have PTSD. Almost 1 in 5 suffer from severe anxiety. Substance abuse issues is massively common for veterans, and less than 50% ever receive adequate mental health care once returning. On top of this, we know that this man had crippling debt, little success in real estate, in which he sent himself into debt to pursue, and then was in the midst of what his friends and family are describing a bitter divorce. On top of all of that context that Fox is leaving out, his original plan was to carry out this attack on his family, including the wife who was leaving him. So I think the motivation is pretty clear. I mean, it probably mostly has to do with like the divorce and stuff, sending him over like the edge, breaking the last straw. But like the strains of capitalism seem to be what got him there. The lack of care we provide to veterans, the fact we don't guarantee care to everyone, right? And the fact that mental health evaluations and things aren't accessible as they should be. And trying to ignore all of this and instead point to like, he spent a month in Egypt is kind of insane, a little racist. And it's also hilarious, again, how deep they are diving here to try and defend white supremacy and far right-wing violence. Like, oh, how do we, like, can we bring up the gangs and terrorists? And, you know, it's like, oh, how dare you smear those white supremacists that we love so much. Like, if you told me about far left-wing violence, like Luigi, right? For instance, I spent a week condemning Luigi. I'm going to condemn and off rip every single time. And then, sure, we can talk about like the deeper symptoms that caused it. I'll tell you, Luigi's a terrible person. Luigi should rot in prison. Sure, let's talk about the corruption that exists in private insurance, right? If we're going to talk here, you could say, yeah, white supremacy, bad, this bad. I guess you could go, why do they feel this way, right? Why? And I would tell you, it's the media, right? It's the media lying to these people about like immigrant takeovers and things that motivate them to carry out these kinds of attacks. But right-wingers wouldn't want to hear that. But that's not the conversation they want to have. They just want to defend white supremacy outright, which is like kind of crazy, right? It's like, you know, is it real? Can you prove it? No, not a problem. It's not even an issue. Can you believe Biden even said it was an issue? Like, can we just all agree that white supremacy is bad? Like, shouldn't that be something that's like easy for all of us to agree on? But like, oh yeah, you can't because they push white supremacist conspiracy theories like the Great Replacement, for instance, like Tucker Carlson did, which by the way, motivated one of the recent massive shootings that we've had. So they have to run defense for them and for their ideologies, or else they're going to look worse by relation.